This episode of the Oil and Gas Service Podcast is brought to you by Encino Environmental Services. Now picture this. You're an operator in the oil and gas industry and you're constantly juggling the demands of drilling, production, and compliance. You're going to be overwhelming, right? Well, that's where Encino comes in. Encino is revolutionizing environmental compliance and sustainability in the energy sector. They offer emissions monitoring and tailored solutions through cutting-edge technologies to meet the ever-changing industry standards and policies. Encino offers comprehensive services such as air permitting, stack testing, leak detection and repair, environmental site assessments, and much more. They're like the ultimate support team for your environmental needs, ensuring that you're not only meeting regulatory requirements, but also setting new standards for sustainability. Here's the best part. Encino understands the unique challenges of the oil and gas industry. They know that time is money, and they've designed their services to be efficient, effective, and hassle-free, the way you can focus on what you do best: pumping oil, driving growth, maximizing production. So if you're an operator who's looking to streamline compliance processes, minimize risk, enhance sustainability, go check out Encino Environmental Services. Head over to the website EncinoEnviron.com to learn more and just tell them we sent you. What is going on, Wildcatters? Welcome back to another episode of the Oil and Gas Service Podcast. I'm here today with Chris Powers, Vice President of CCUS at none other than Chevron. Chris, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me today.
I'm excited, man. We've had some really good engagement. We've got Kelly in the room as well. We had some really good engagement with Chevron over the years, and so it's just fantastic to have you here. There's so many questions that I have. Really quickly, what is it that you do?
Okay, so I'm Vice President of Carbon Capture, Utilization, and Storage, as you said. So what does that mean? So I moved into this role. I'm a chemical engineer by background, and we'll cover that, I guess, a little bit later. But moved into this role about 18 months ago now, and it was part of a new segment that we've stood up within Chevron. So we've got our traditional business. We call it Oil Products and Gas, OPG, and a couple other segments we can run through later. But then we have Chevron New Energies, and it was stood up in summer of 2021 as a sort of an internal newco focused on tackling the energy transition challenge as part of the broader Chevron Corporation. So we've got three divisions: Carbon Capture, Utilization, and Storage, or CCUS. We'll use the acronym now that I've defined it. Hydrogen, and then offsets and emerging. And then we also have a big renewable fuels business that we sort of share with the traditional business.
So what is your actual role within that? What does your day-to-day look like? Are you just evaluating these technologies? Or are you trying to figure out how it plays into a bigger strategy? Is it commercialization?
All of the above.
Okay.
All of the above, Jake. So, one of the things I love best about this job, it's certainly the most intense, but also in a lot of ways the most fun job I've ever had within Chevron. I'm a Chevron lifer, joined the company straight out of Rice. But we do so many different things, all the from certainly early project evaluations, both for our own assets as well as for CCUS or hydrogen delivery as a service to third parties. We also make investments. So Chevron New Energies was the lead investor in two recent rounds. I'll call it growth capital phase, one with Svante, another one with Carbon Clean. Those are both carbon capture tech companies. So we do a bit of that. Again, we've got projects from sort of the flicker in somebody's mind all the way through stuff that's moving in towards pre-FEED engineering. That's going to be a real project where we're putting steel on the ground here in a few years.
That's super exciting. So is it more commercial solutions today, or is it just a ton of R&D, or is it kind of like a mixture of both?
It's a mixture of both. So one of the biggest challenges within CCUS in general is it's not free. It costs money to implement this technology, right? The proverbial no free lunch. So there are existing, I'll call it traditional technology or Gen 1 technology to do carbon capture, but it's not cheap. And the capture piece of it could be, your numbers vary depending on the project and the type. It could be 70 to 80% of the cost of sort of a full CCUS value chain project is in the capture tech. So you can do projects right now, either where you've got a highly concentrated CO2 stream already, for instance, off of a gas processing plant like you'd see in the traditional business, or a few other applications. But to really tackle the market more broadly, we're going to have to drive the cost of capture down. So you've got sort of the bucket of projects you can do in the here and now, and then you've got some bucket of stuff on the margin. But then there's a huge tail that is really going to require technology advancement in order to monetize. And so that's why we're doing some of the investments both ourselves with the growth capital portion of Chevron New Energies, but then also partnering with our tech ventures organization for the really early stuff, which is going to take years to bring forward.
I have so many questions. There's so many things I want to dive into. Let's talk about your background. So you said Chevron lifer. You said you went to Rice. Are you from Houston?
From Port Neches. I grew up in Port Neches over in Beaumont, Port Arthur in the Golden Triangle.
Okay.
Been there for a couple of generations. My grandpa, my mom's dad, was a pipe fitter, actually, a very blue collar background. He was in the union, on the workmen's committee. And I'm a big believer in solid blue collar jobs and really helping people to grow generationally. So, he worked hard for many, many years, hardest worker I ever knew, and a big role model for me in my life. He's of course passed away now, but he was pipe fitter for Gulf Oil. Then so I clearly had my mom here in Port Arthur. My dad is a chemical engineer, same as me. He grew up, born in Minnesota, grew up in Oregon, and he has an interesting story. He had a job offers actually from Texaco, from Chevron, from a couple other companies, but did not like the West Coast, specifically the Pacific Northwest. A lot of people love it. love it, but he didn't like the rain and the sort of the gloom that pervades much of the year. So he, on a whim. At the time, Texaco made him a job offer. First one in Puget Sound, and then he said, "I don't want to be in the Pacific Northwest." And they said, "Well, how about we've got a place near Houston called Port Arthur?" And he said, "Sign me up." So he sight unseen, moved.
I don't know many people who would choose Port Arthur over
Puget Sound. Absolutely, but it worked out well. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. So he moved down, chemical engineer in the refining side of the business for Texaco, then Star Enterprise, and then Motiva ultimately now, also retired. And then, so I was born there. Sort of the oil and gas business, primarily downstream and my bit of the bloodline. It's in the sort of the family DNA.
So you just knew early on, you're like, this is where I'm going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and loved, it's the usual story probably. Loved science, loved math. What am I going to do? And said, hey, chemical engineering sounds like the way to go.
And so did you do that at Rice or did you do undergrad?
That was mine. I only have an undergrad, did it at Rice. And
then out of Rice, just straight to Chevron.
Yeah. So my wife and I are both chemical engineers, actually both with the company. She's retired now.
Okay.
But yeah, we were lucky enough to get an internship. It was pre-merger. I was in our sort of corporate engineering group. She was in our power and gasification group. And then sort of did a couple internships during the summers, and then got full-time offers right around the time of the Chevron Texaco merger, which made things interesting. They don't like telling this story, but like the job offer got redacted because it was from the wrong parent, and then I got a new one. But fortunately, so started with the company and have been with it, been with Chevron Texaco, and now Chevron ever since.
Okay. So what have you done? What have you done within Chevron, kind of leading up, and anything in particular that kind of sticks out to you?
Yeah, I would say the epitome of jack of all trades, master of none. So started in our corporate engineering group, was called the Energy Research and Technology Company at the time. But it's sort of, you could think about it as your corporate engineering and technology center, and worked on primarily new technology development, but it was really around heavy oil processing back in the days. You go back, this is in the early 2000s. The era of easy oil is over, and there's not going to be any more light sweet crude anywhere. Clearly this is pre shale and tight boom. And so we had a huge focus on heavy oil at the time. And so I got to work on a few early heavy oil developments. We had a big development in Venezuela called Hamaca, and then really some sort of next generation heavy oil processing technology. So it was really cool. Did that for a couple of years. And then, to be honest, I thought we've been in Houston for 4 years at Rice, and then moved into an apartment, bought a house in Meyerland, and thought, okay, set up, never going to leave. This is perfect. We'll be here for a long time. And then won't ever forget it. I was at a friend's wedding in Fredericksburg and got a phone call from our, we call them our PDRs, but they're people help early in your career move you around. And Gary said, hey, we've got a job opportunity for you in Adderall.
Where's that? I don't even
And
heard
that
of
was
that.
the
Never
first
even heard of
question. That
place.
was the first question out of my mouth. I said, Adderall, where's that? And he said, it's in Kazakhstan. We've got a great opportunity for you and Heather working on some really cool stuff in Tengiz. So we thought about it, told the family, who was floored, and said, okay, we're going to pack up and give this adventure a try. So in May, June of 2005, got on a plane and moved to Kazakhstan, and that was the start of the story.
I don't know many people who've lived in Kazakhstan. You might be the first.
Yeah, it's a wonderful country. Honestly, we lived resident in Adderall, probably a couple 100,000 people at the time. So it's on the Caspian Sea, on the north part of the Caspian Sea. And then we have a huge field. You've probably heard of it, called Tengiz. Tengiz Chevron is our LLC partnership there. But this is just, it's one of the world's greatest oil fields, a super giant field that was discovered, high H2S. So it's a real challenge to develop. And that's really, I think, what brought Chevron into it at the time. And so we've gone through a series of developments over the last, 25 plus years to really grow the field. One of our biggest assets in the portfolio, but just one of the things I love the best was just getting to really learn and stretch yourself. And the people are just wonderful. We've still got friends from Kazakhstan. In fact, one of them, it's just amazing how small world it is. One of them, who was one of the finance senior leaders there at the time, we were close, and she says hello to me after an internal town hall. I said, Zamzagul, what are you doing here? And it's amazing how it's such a small world. So loved living in Kazakhstan.
So on your path, did you kind of seek out or just kind of become interested in, was it just newer forms of energy, or was it like technology? Like, how did you land here? Were you voluntold? Like, that's how in the Marine Corps it was like, you get a new billet and it's like, you're doing this, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Or is it something you're like, I'm so into this, and let's do this.
I always love learning about new things. I mean, people joke at work, I'm a little bit of a geek, on the geek side, right? In terms of, you love the technology and all of it. And so I think that's really how my career's progressed. I'll jump through to connect a few of the dots. So we're in Kazakhstan for a couple of years. Then we got an opportunity to move to New Orleans, work in our Gulf of Mexico business unit. Okay. And I never really worked upstream at that point. So had an opportunity to do we call it facilities engineering, sort of surface engineering job. And then I got one of my mentors, who's still a great mentor to me to this day, gave me an opportunity to hey, I think you've got the capability to learn the subsurface. So I'm put you in an asset manager job. So took over a bunch of shelf fields that were, this was in sort of 2010, 11 time frame. We were, blowing and going. That's when oil price was moving north. A couple of rigs, workover units. It was just really fun. You sort of running your own business there, and that really whet the appetite. And then got an opportunity to move to Thailand. And again, it's a theme here is lots of different types of roles. So we had at the time actually an EPC company that was a joint venture with a local Thai affiliate of a Singaporean-based company, and this is a great role. It's basically the COO of the company. Said, hey, do you want to take this? And I said, absolutely. It's a new challenge and new opportunity to learn. So went over and did that.
Get to live in Thailand too?
Yeah, lived in Bangkok, and we had a fabrication yard in near Pattaya, and learned so much there. It was really awesome. And one of the key learnings for me that translates into this business a little bit is you were on the other side of the table a little bit. So I'm still employed by Chevron, but seconded into this EPC company, and I actually had to negotiate against Chevron. So the guy, so it's a little bit, because we're a supplier for platforms. So you learn a little bit about how is the other side thinking about this. So I think that's helped when I think about engaging with service companies and others. You're just coming at it from a different perspective, and it's good to have that lens.
I think what is the average length at a job these days? Probably like 3 years or something, and everybody's kind of like swapping around. And so when you come across somebody like yourself who's a lifer, I think a lot of people have this preconceived notion of like, oh, I'm doing the exact same thing day in, day out for like a long period of time. It's going to be super boring. But you get to travel the world. You get to go to all these different roles. You get to learn all of these different things. And so like you have like you said, like this breadth of knowledge on so many different topics and aspects of this business. Like, I think it's safe to say that's why leaders of organizations like Chevron, just have so much knowledge. about this business. Like you don't get to the top without
I'm not at the top, to be clear.
Your time.
But yeah, no, it's I mean, that's to me one of the biggest things that I look for in folks who, want to learn or have a mentoring relationship is this growth mindset. And it's a little bit trite phrase, but you've got to have that fire, I think, to want to learn, to want to stretch yourself, to want to grow, especially in this new piece of the business. But really, I'd say it goes in the traditional business as well. That's really, I think, where you make yourself a better employee, a better leader, a better overall just person, is to really stretch yourself and understand, man, how can I absorb all the knowledge I can, figure out how to make improvement. And then I also believe, you sort of, it's this growth curve, right? You're going to make an impact, and then it's time for somebody else to take over the reins of any given role. And then hopefully you get the right backfill, and then they're going to think of things that you haven't thought of, and then really take the business to the next level.
I can't think of another industry where you have that level of opportunity.
Yeah. So a story I love to tell, and I'll leave out his last name. He's retired, but when I was a baby engineer, I was probably a year in. This was called him a unit manager at the time in the engineering and technology company. We'll just call him Kurt. There's lots of Kurts. And he said, you guys are coming to a sunset industry. And this would have been, 2003 or something. This is going to be a boring place. And, he was a Chevron lifer, very nearing retirement, but in that sort of doom and gloom mentality. Mm-hmm. And I said, I got a different thesis. I think this is going to be incredibly exciting. Energy demand is going to continue to grow. Billions more people are going to be on the planet. And it's going to take what we're doing today plus so many different new things. And that's ultimately, I think, what got me excited about New Energies when we decided, hey, we're going to play a significant role in the energy transition, because this is stuff that's going to be the next 5 decades from now.
I can't think of a better time to be in this industry. I think it's so exciting. I think there's so many new technologies that are being developed. The barriers to entry have come down dramatically. We've seen just in the last 12 months, AI is really 6 months.
Wild.
Has just eaten the world completely, right? And so like levels of productivity, like every single one of us in the office have ChatGPT or some form of AI open on a monitor at all times, and we're using it for such a variety of tasks, right?
Absolutely.
And you think of just like the implications for like your level of productivity and how much you can get done. I remember whenever I first got access to just like GPT-4, I did what I would equate to be 6 months worth of work in 3 days, for especially like really heavy lift creative work, writing very long scripts and things that would turn into something else. And I just did it in record time. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And then there's like, think about like engineering heavy jobs, or where there's tons of math, or there's tons of things that you can focus on more of the high value things that AI can't do.
Bingo. Absolutely. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I have totally similar thesis on this. I mean, so I was prepping for an interview recently, an internal interview I was doing, and I working out all my questions. And then I had a good friend who said, this is like perfect for ChatGPT. Help me think about an interview script for an interview with so-and-so. I won't say who it was. And, it just spits out, and I'm going, well, damn, I thought I did a pretty good job, but these are some really interesting ideas on here. And it's just amazing how quickly you can do it. So to me, that's a huge opportunity, is for I don't know if commoditized, for tasks that can be automated, move forward and automate it. And then that releases you to focus on what you can distinctly add value to. I mean, a mentor, this is from totally different context that he used in, but focus on the things that only you can control or only you can do. Mm-hmm. And it's the same kind of a concept with AI, with ChatGPT, that can release so much potential.
So with AI, you have all these new startups popping up. You have all of the oil and gas companies diversifying into different energy sources. And so I'm curious to hear Chevron's take. I think I have a good idea as to what y'all's thesis is. For us, I don't like to use the word energy transition. I'll tell you why. Because I feel like there's a negative connotation towards oil and gas. And I think that by the virtue of what we do, having people like yourself and other leaders and startup founders come in here who are building the most cutting edge emerging technologies, I think we look at it through a scientific lens of like what is actually possible and what is not. And so I think that has kind of like molded our kind of worldview of like where oil and gas plays a part and where new energies kind of play a part. And so I like to adopt the whole thing of energy addition, because I think
Love it.
that you build upon what we already have. And I think you move from being just an oil and gas company to being an oil, gas, hydrogen, CCUS, you name it, right? Company, right? And I see that playing out with a lot of different groups. And so, yeah, now let's dive in all that.
Yeah, for sure. So if you go back and look at my LinkedIn posts over the last 2 years, the term that I've sort of evolved to is I use a couple of them interchangeably, but energy expansion or energy evolution. It's same thesis, because the reality is, and this gets into a little bit of our internal thesis at Chevron, it's an all of the above solution. There's no, it's interesting. I speak at a ton of conferences, and there is this minority that still says, oh, we're going to magically flip a switch and we're going to get peak energy demand and we're going to be able to electrify everything through renewables. That's just not reality. The reality is the world is going to need traditional hydrocarbons and more for decades and decades and decades to come. So I think how we think about it is you need a robust traditional business, traditional oil, gas, and products business. And guess what? That's going to likely grow over time too. It's been, historically 80%ish of the energy mix for decades, and the energy demand is going to continue to grow. So oil and gas is going to grow over time, and there's going to be a place for green power and hydrogen and CCUS and renewable fuels. So I'd say a big tent, all of the above company, and believe that all those businesses are going to be required. Some geographies, whether it's a policy jurisdiction or if it's just a physical geography, will dictate which one is maybe more influential than others in a particular region. But all of the above solutions, I think, is how we need to think about it. And I wish, to some extent, lots of, whether it's, let's just call them stakeholders more broadly, would take a practical view on this. You're not going to be able to transition away from, and look, I'm the guy running the CCUS business within Chevron. The new energies businesses are going to have a huge role to play, but you're not going to be able to magically flip a switch.
Yeah, it just doesn't simply work that way.
Yeah, math doesn't work.
Yeah, and talking about energy demand kind of just growing in perpetuity. It's energy is the base layer to modern society, and I think we get so caught up in our glass castle here in the United States, speaking from a place of privilege.
Yes,
that we have energy on tap any given time, 24/7. We have access to the internet. We have all of these wonderful things in life. And I don't know the exact stat, but I want to say it's like somewhere like half of the world, like 4 billion people, do not have 24/7 electricity, right? And so you think about over time, as we're bringing more and more people out of poverty,
energy poverty,
yeah, and bringing them into a modern society, which is still it's a crazy concept until you visited some of these places and you've seen how in 2023 some people are still living. It just shows you that there's still so many people that are going to be consuming more and more and more energy, and oil and gas is not going anywhere. And we do need this all of the above approach to, innovation is absolutely needed. And you have some people from within the industry that say this is a waste of money, right? Let's look at shale. How much capital did we torch to get to the point to where we're at today? There's a cost of innovation.
Absolutely.
Look at Silicon Valley. They need one company out of 10 to provide the returns for the losses of the other 9.
Yeah.
Right? It's the power law. So there's still so much work to be done. And I think it's exciting times, because I think people are really prioritizing that. And I think that I think in the messaging and everything, I think everybody's kind of taking more of a pragmatic, and we're not swinging too far kind of one direction or the other. And I think that that's exactly what's needed.
Yeah, I love your comment. I use a slightly different stat, but I talk about the 2 billion additional people who are gonna, who aspire to have the same energy standard of living that we're privileged to have. And this is something I tell my kids, my 3 kids. I try to tell them every day is we're very privileged to live where we are, privileged to have what we have. And you've got to take a global view. And I mean, one sort of personal story that sticks with me on this. It was back when I lived in Kazakhstan, and I'm a musician. I play a French horn for what it's worth. And we had a little quintet, a couple of expats with a couple of the Kazakhs, a few of the Kazakhs. I guess it's 5. We would do concerts and stuff. It's low key stuff. We're not, not a professional, right? But after one of them, we went to Golmira, is their name, house, and it was really good perspective setting on, this is a place where the water's outside, limited electricity, interruptible electricity for sure. And just, it's like, okay, so I'm going to go back to my expat housing, and it's a good reminder of how good we have it, and that all those folks want to aspire to a higher standard of living. And that's part of the critical role we play. And one of the reasons I love the energy industry is we're delivering this super valuable input to everybody's lives to market affordably, reliably, and ever cleaner.
I wish there was in some countries you have mandatory military service that you have to do. I wish there was a program that was mandatory, go stop in 5 different countries who have it worse than we do.
Yeah.
I did that. My parents signed me up for some missions trips as a kid when I was I went on 12 and 14, and went to the worst parts of Mexico, right? And at the time, I didn't fully understand why they were doing this. And now I look back, and it was the best thing, because at 12 years old, I came back with a perspective that was I have it great. I have it great here. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have plumbing. They didn't even have a roof over their head. They didn't have consistent food.
Yes.
And so it just I don't know. I think I was probably still an awful teenager, but I think I did have a different perspective on just the way the world actually works, and just how privileged we are here.
And I love your idea. It's however you implement it, and clearly that approach isn't going to happen in the U.S., but I think it's incumbent on us to recognize how blessed we are, and then recognize the critical role all of us in the industry play in making lives better for so many people. That's going to make the world better as a whole.
This podcast is brought to you by EnergyX. Are you tired of paying huge rates to the big cloud providers? Are you worried about being booted off a cloud platform if your company doesn't meet their ever-shifting standards? Ready to step up your data security and disaster recovery game? Well, ladies and gentlemen, your new cloud is ready. Introducing xCloud, the scalable, resilient computing cloud that is also actually affordable. It's high performance compute for half the cost. HPC for HTC. xCloud from Red Team is opening a beta program for new cloud computing customers, and that means you, my friend. The xCloud is powered by the XMDC immersion cooled modular data center from EnergyX. I've seen this data center in operation, and it is a total game changer. So if you want more information about the beta launch, go to the URL in the description. Type in promo code BETA, BETA, for 50% off of your first instance. And so the URL is going to be digitalwildcatters.com/EnergyX. So let's talk about CCUS specifically. First off, you want to take a stab at defining what it is for those who are not familiar?
Absolutely. So carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So there's a couple of elements within. We use CCUS. We've got a U instead of just CCS, carbon capture and storage. So a couple different ideas. I'll start with CCS. So fundamentally what that's about is taking CO2 molecules that come out of fired equipment, power plants, generators, etc., capturing the CO2 molecules, dehydrating them, pressurizing them, and then bringing them to a well and injecting it thousands of feet underground safely and securely for geologic time to lower, with the goal of ultimately lowering the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere.
Okay. And then there's two, I think there's two methods to do that. Right? I think there's direct air capture, or DACs as some people call them. And then there's post-combustion?
Yeah, post-combustion or point source capture. So happy to dive into both of those. So I'll start with point source capture. So this is my chemical engineering training. The easiest element or molecule you're going to capture is really sort of in any process is the one at the highest concentration. So point source capture, we think if you sort of say I've got limited resources, whether it's capital resources or technology or whatnot, and your objective is to lower the CO2 concentration, you're going to want to go after the highest concentration, largest streams first. And that's where I think point source capture makes a lot of sense. So what you're going to do there is target the large CO2 streams that could come off. It could come off gas processing plants, power generation, cement, steel, etc., the large point source emitters, and then you're going to install various types of capture technology to grab those streams, which might be between, some CO2 is already concentrated on a gas processing plant. You're already in some cases going to have a nearly 100% stream, all the way down to natural gas power generation might be at 3 to 4% CO2 in the exhaust gas stream. So you got a wide range of concentrations you're dealing with, but they're all far higher than, say, 300 to 400 ppm, which is the kind of numbers you're talking about with DAC, or direct air capture. So our thesis is the first significant projects that are going to be the most efficient and effective to do are going to be point source capture projects. And then the real magic trifecta is when you have the emissions, then you've got the geology, and then you've got, I'll say, the enabling policy framework, whether that's a regulatory policy or a fiscal policy, to enable it all to all harmonize and come together and make a project go forward. And we can dive into those elements if you'd like as well.
So we talked about the CCS. Before we move on, what's the utilization? How do you utilize CO2?
Yeah, so utilization, people use the U in different ways. In Chevron, when we talk about the utilization, we're really talking about turning the captured CO2 into some sort of a ideally high value product, but at least a product that has a market. So you can, I call it jokingly sort of CO2 to stuff. So it can be CO2 to there's technologies to sort of mineralize it, to convert it into aggregate. So CO2 to input to cement or concrete. You can turn CO2 into intermediates through electrochemical processing. And then there's CO2 to finished products like CO2 to jet, or CO2 to similar finished products. The unfortunate reality is that CO2 is a super low energy molecule. It became a low energy molecule when the hydrocarbon was combusted and released all this wonderful energy, which powers the world we live in. The resultant molecule, CO2, is low energy. So to do really most of these CO2 conversion processes, you've got to input a lot of energy, and ideally it's going to be green power, because you don't want to be contributing to the carbon footprint. So you're inputting a lot of power to this low energy molecule mixed with some other elements or molecules, and ultimately converting it into a product that can be reused. So a bit of circularity to it.
Yeah.
The U, broadly speaking, I'll say the U is earlier days. So a lot of there are technology companies out there that, we certainly are clearly, obviously canvassing the landscape through our technology ventures organization and through Chevron New Energies to look for the right ones that have the potential to grow and scale and be successful. But broadly speaking, the U is earlier days. We're going to have to do a lot of the work through carbon capture and storage.
So we had a company, and I hope I don't butcher this, a company called, I think it was Earth In, and they presented at Fuse last year. And it was the first time that I'd seen, how do you, you have all this CO2, how can you turn into a feedstock to be something that's going to be valuable? And so they were taking the CO2, and then I think they were putting it into what I believe is called a supercritical phase.
Yep.
Right. And then they were able to do something in this closed loop system to essentially act as a long duration battery storage. Super, super interesting. And so that's one of the companies that I'm really paying attention to, because that's they pulled it off. That's a game changer.
Absolutely.
An absolute game changer, because then you take that and you're like, okay, well now you have infinite amounts of CO2 that we can capture. So you have a feedstock. It's all closed loop. The long duration battery storage changes the
game on the
renewables, and everything, right? And so it makes those truly sustainable and being able to turn those on and off. So that's super interesting. So okay, if you're injecting the CO2 into a well, is this a specially drilled well? Is this an existing just well bore? Walk me through that.
Yeah, so this is the whole thesis of why Chevron picked CCUS as one of the focus areas for our New Energies business. CCUS leverages sort of three, broadly speaking, there's more skill sets that we have as a company historically over the last 140 years. You think about the capture side, that's process engineering and operations, oil field and refining operations. That's what that looks like. Transportation, we do pipelines, we've done pipelines, and then injection and storage, wells and reservoir management. That's our bread and butter, right? So you'll do, if you walk through a project, you'll do the capture, the dehydration, compression, then you get to a site. Okay, well, what's the site? That's really the question you're asking. So two broad buckets of locations where you can inject the CO2 in terms of a geologic characteristic, and then we can talk about geographic later. So from a geologic characteristic, you're either looking for depleted oil and gas fields, ideally ones with few well penetrations. The fewer well penetrations, the best, because it's fewer things to manage, fewer risks to mitigate, or large, low dip saline aquifers. So that's sort of the other broad category. So oil and gas reservoir maybe more intuitive. You've depleted a formation that clearly has a seal and integrity, and you're reversing flow. Generally, there's a lot of ideas around, hey, can we reuse infrastructure? Can we reuse pipelines? Can we reuse wells? It's complicated, I think, is the answer. And all that has to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, because clearly one of our top focuses is you got to do all this with the utmost operational excellence, because when you're putting the CO2 in the ground, you need to be assured that it's going to stay there for geologic time. So
outside of it, like obviously escaping and like all that being for naught, are there any other risk associated with injecting that?
Yeah. So we've been handling, as an industry, CO2 for, moving towards a century now, right? And specifically within Chevron, we first pioneered CO2 floods. We haven't talked about EOR, and we should touch on that in a little bit. It's an area where we have a little bit less focus, but we pioneered CO2 EOR in West Texas, decades ago. You think about the 1960s kind of time frame. So
I think you guys are actually one of the largest water floods out in West Texas, right?
Yeah, we've historically rotated a lot of the fields out of our portfolio in the Permian recently, but had huge water floods
and steam floods in California.
Steam floods in California. We have historically been one of the largest steam flood operators. I wouldn't want to quote.
Yeah. So what's the difference between this and like a CO2
flood?
Yeah.
So on a CO2 flood, you're injecting the CO2 into an existing producing oil and gas reservoir with the idea that you're going to change the miscibility or somehow otherwise sweep the fluids
EOR.
And produce more oil and gas than you would on a baseline primary production approach. And then some CO2 would stay in the reservoir, but a lot of it, you can think about it like a big recycle loop. So the complete flip here is when we're putting the CO2 in either the depleted oil and gas field or in the saline aquifer, we don't want to ever see it again. So you're putting it in. You're looking for formations where you have high integrity in the seal, ideally multiple seal layers as you work from the surface down, and then you're going to do that. It's sort of like reservoir engineering in reverse. You're going to build a reservoir model based on the characteristics, your delineation wells and your fluid properties. And then you're going to model, and this is again, it's the really cool stuff. You're going to model where you're going to inject and where the CO2 plume is going to move over time. And then as you start injecting, you have monitoring wells. It's just like history matching again on production, sort of in reverse. And you're going to monitor, is the CO2 plume behaving as you would have expected? And then you tweak injection. You might tweak how much is going here versus another well, just like you would in any sort of a traditional production operation. But you're doing it in reverse. You model that, and then ultimately, any given aquifer or reservoir will have some volume that's your target. You're doing the monitoring and verification over time, and then you'll get to the end of life on a particular asset. You'll turn off the injection, and then the CO2 will stay there. And then there's one of the interesting things is how do you manage the long term? Ultimately, the CO2 it'll be modeled, and we'll get to this end state, and then basically that particular asset is done, and you've put these are typically millions of tons per annum over maybe 20 or 30 years. So you've put a significant amount of CO2, taken it out of the atmosphere, and put it into the ground for permanent sequestration. It's really cool stuff.
So let's deviate just a second just to talk about EOR.
Yep.
I've said for years, obviously we're not discovering new Permian basins, right? And so the question becomes on the oil and gas side, what is kind of the next frontier? And so, especially me seeing a lot of new technology, I was like, I think there's two things. I think EOR is one of them, and I think the cost of offshore continues to kind of come down. And then recently, there was a whole article, it was like Exxon and Marathon and a couple other guys have all this new data on refracts, and they're showing that the recovery rate is like double possibly what it was the first time. And so I think there's like significant advances. I'm curious if that's like EOR as a whole continues to be a focus for Chevron as like another frontier.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the so I'll jump back into the traditional business. where you found oil is this is a corollary to what you're saying. Where you found oil is one of the best places to find more oil, right?
Exactly.
So anything you can do to squeeze more oil out of the existing rock or the existing asset is generally going to be a cost-effective and efficient way to do things. So a story I like to tell, I actually told this in a town hall last week in the office, is to go back to your question on heavy oil steam flood formations. If you go back and look at like our Kern River field as an example in the San Joaquin Valley in California, you see the production over time. It's all primary production. And then as we mastered sort of cyclic injection and then really steam flooding, you just saw this huge spike in the amount of oil that you recovered. And then you think about that area under the production curve over time, just unlocked so much more production from these assets. You're leaving way less oil in the ground and bringing more energy to the world, critically needed energy to the world. So things you can do to improve recovery in the existing assets absolutely is a key focus area for us. And so, steam flood's a good historical example. I think in the shale and tight formations, this is clearly a key focus area for us and many others. When you think about everything from how we're doing fracking, you go to zipper fracks, you go to refracks, frac fluid chemistry optimization. Mm-hmm. I think there's going to continue to be many, many advancements in that space that's going to help ultimately release more production from the assets that we have in the ground.
All right. So going back to CCUS, how does it make money?
Yeah. So very clearly, CCUS is a policy-enabled market right now.
Okay.
And I think that broadly goes for the new energies, technologies or asset class in general. And I think that's okay. I don't think that's too dissimilar from how many of the technologies that are and the assets that are in the market now, like solar, wind. It's how many of them started out with policy enablement to help kickstart those technologies and turn them into businesses that are viable. So zeroing in on CCUS specifically, the IRA was a game changer in terms of helping to create that right little bit of incentive to help get some of the foundational projects moving forward. So right now, you've probably heard 45Q is the incentive that is in place to help get these projects moving from, I'll call it like a revenue stream standpoint. Broadly, our hope is that after the policy enablement, these are eventually going to evolve into marketplaces. And it's tied to one of our thesis within Chevron is we believe that a price on carbon makes a lot of sense. A well-designed policy that creates a fair and equitable playing field that doesn't allow the government to pick winners and losers. We broadly want a marketplace where the most efficient and effective technologies will compete head to head, and those ones that are the most efficient, effective will move to the fore and will be the leaders in the space. So right now, policy enablement is critical, and we believe in the future these will grow into more sustainable markets.
So with the current with the current way it's set up, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, is it a you capture X amount of carbon and re-inject that, and then there's it carbon credits, or is it tax credits, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the mechanism it varies a little bit between. So it depends on what role you play in the value chain. Okay. So if you're an emitter, you've got to decide: am I going to install capture equipment myself and then take the 45Q credit myself and then sell the CO2 stream to, call it like a TNS or transport and sequestration provider? Or do I want somebody to come in and provide me a full service solution, a full value chain solution? Or can I do it myself? And it's interesting. We've got a big project called Bayou Bend, which is just really between here and Beaumont, Port Arthur. Okay. That's going to be, we think, one of the largest combined offshore-onshore CCS projects in the world. That's really servicing the huge industrial corridor we have between Houston and Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Orange. So when it's a bit unique for us because we don't really have large assets in this area on a downstream side. Of course, we're a huge producer in the Permian, but here within the Houston, Beaumont, Port Arthur area, we don't have a ton of downstream assets. So for us, this is around generating a CCS as a service, engaging the emitters, and then working with them to figure out what does the solution space look like. And so just to double click on your question, you could have an arrangement where we could come in and offer a full service solution. We could install capture equipment and handle the capture, the transport, and the sequestration. More commonly, the emitter will want to install their own capture equipment within their fence line, and then there'll be a custody transfer at the fence line, and then we'd be handling the transportation and sequestration piece.
Do you do that as a service or a joint venture, or?
There's so much commercial work to be done in this space. It's really fascinating, Jake. The commercial constructs are myriad, right? And there's a way you can actually exchange the 45Q credit. That's an approach. Or if the emitter wants to keep the 45Q credit, it can be a flat fee per ton that's used as the transfer mechanism. And everybody is doing it and thinking about it a little differently. And that's one of the things from my sort of my love of learning, the commercial mindset is you think about the midstream business, which is maybe a good analogy. The models are pretty consistent, but they've developed over decades and decades and decades.
Mm-hmm.
We're here in the infancy. It's really, sort of nascent times. And so how is everybody thinking about it? How are folks thinking about it from is it a ship or pay or is it a take or pay? Who's on either end of this?
Yeah.
And what's the criticality of the interruptibility of delivery of the CO2 versus, redundancy on the injection side? So all this we're sort of building it as we go.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I love is I think in general, everybody on both sides of this is taking a practical view, a pragmatist approach, knowing that, hey, we're not going to be able to solve every commercial eventuality here on day one, but let's get the bones in place so that we can start moving these projects forward with the recognition that there are going to be ends that we're going to have to tie up over time.
So with Bayou Bend specifically, is that something where you're capturing all of the CO2 locally, or is it, I know you said half onshore, kind of half offshore. Are you piping in CO2? How does CO2 get to Bayou Bend?
Yeah, great question. So just to set the picture geographically for folks, so the offshore component is a offshore sequestration lease that our partners and Chevron were awarded from the Texas GLO, General Land Office. It's directly south of Jefferson County, so south of Port Arthur, Sabine Pass, just offshore. Then we have an onshore portion that's between East Chambers, West Jefferson County, big contiguous block that's in sort of the prairie land in that area. And sort of our hypothesis is emitters want redundancy, they want optionality, they want to know that, hey, if there's an issue and you discover maybe there's a fault that you didn't predict in the initial modeling, maybe there's actually different policy frameworks on onshore injection versus offshore injection. Okay. So establishing optionality and then going to the market with that you've got I'll say the brand recognition. People know that Chevron can handle our subsurface. We're partnered with two great companies, Talos and CarbonVert, which bring interesting different perspective. Talos, a much smaller oil and gas operator. Tim Duncan's their CEO, great partner, and he thinks about things from a different perspective. And then CarbonVert, a CCUS startup, fundamentally, private equity based startup. And we all bring different skill sets. And then I think collectively, partnership is a key thing for me. Collectively, that partnership really enables us to compete in the market. So what do? We go and talk to the emitters. So, you think about the classes of emitters. You can have LNG. I'm not going to name specific companies, but you've got LNG producers, you've got industrial gas companies, you've got petchem companies, you've got refineries on both the Houston Ship Channel area and the Beaumont, Port Arthur, Orange area. And you're in early days. You're flipping term sheets. You're trying to figure out, okay, how is this going to be a win-win for both of us? And then ultimately, you want to get enough of those foundation customers that you say, "Hey, this is going to go forward." We're very bullish about this project. I mean, Southeast Texas is, I think, the best, if not one of the best places in the entire world to do CCS because you've got the right mix of emissions, you've got some of the best geology in the world, and you've got, I'll say, broadly speaking, a group of stakeholders from the governmental side to the community side that wants to see energy continue to be a critical part of the economy and the community for decades to come. So this is just building on the foundation of the traditional business. We've got the traditional business, and now we've got New Energies growth that'll provide jobs, for my kids and many others for the next decades to come. So super exciting times.
So I want to dive into the rest of New Energies, but first I do have a question. I've heard things. I'm not out there exchanging or trading carbon credits, right? And so I've kind of heard some grumblings from certain people that it's a very analog, like PDFs are just kind of being sent by email. Is that the case, or is there like a fluid marketplace of like, I don't know, I would imagine that you would almost like serialize these kinds of credits, or they would have some kind of like watermark or like fingerprint, and there would be some sort of immutable ledger, similar to like, some blockchain. What is this? What is the state of that currently?
Yeah. So you're talking about, I guess, really broadly speaking, the durability and the verifiability of the credits, right? And clearly there are different. I think what you're seeing is there are emerging different buckets of credits that would be used in the offsets market. Our approach is to make sure that we talked about this actually last week, is one of our criteria we're looking at, are we working with credible partners, good bona fides that we know are doing good projects, and these are reputable, verifiable credits over the life cycle of the project. And we could spend a whole hour on this, but I've got a colleague, Barbara. Maybe you can talk to her sometime. Mm-hmm. She runs that piece of the business. But you've got nature-based solutions. You could have afforestation, reforestation. You can have trees in Louisiana. You can have mangroves in Southeast Asia. You can have I'll say a technological carbon removal credits, like from a DAC, which we didn't really get too much into. There's so much in this space. Broadly speaking, I think getting the right framework and price in place, the right regulatory regime to ensure that what that you're exchanging is a quality credit is something that is important and will continue to grow in importance over time.
Cool. Yeah, I was just kind of curious what to say to that. So New Energies. So obviously we talked about carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. That's a mouthful. Yeah, I know you got hydrogen. What else are you guys working on over there?
Yeah, so our four big ones, again, CCUS, which we've talked about, hydrogen, blue and green. I'll touch on that in a minute. Okay. Offsets and emerging. So offsets clearly has a linkage to the carbon capture space or nature-based solutions. Emerging, which for us means things like geothermal. It could be nuclear. A lot of this is earlier days, hence the name emerging. And then we have a big renewable fuels business. So if you want, I can touch on.
Let's dive into all of them.
Touch on each.
Let's start with hydrogen.
Hydrogen maybe has the closest linkage, especially with blue, to the CCS business. So two broad buckets. We're color agnostic. Could you define blue really quickly? Yeah, so blue hydrogen, it would be hydrogen you'd produce in conjunction with carbon capture and storage, right? Okay. So you think about a natural gas feedstock, ideally a low carbon intensity quality feedstock out of the Permian as an example, and that's something where we have a clear value chain linkage. So you bring in a low carbon intensity natural gas, you're going to reform it through either a steam methane reformer or an autothermal reformer. You produce hydrogen, and then you produce a CO2 stream. So for blue hydrogen concept, you're going to capture that CO2 stream as part of the process, and then you'll do the same compression, dehydration, et cetera steps, and then you're going to inject it downhole generally at the site or proximate to the site of the hydrogen production. So then you end up with a blue hydrogen stream that can be sold to the market, or that can be converted to derivatives like ammonia and then used in markets domestically or abroad. So that's blue. Green is what people typically think about as the renewable-based or electrolytic hydrogen production. So you'll take a renewable power source, solar, wind, whatever. You go through take water through an electrolyzer, and you basically decompose the molecule into hydrogen, molecular hydrogen, molecular oxygen, and then you've got that hydrogen stream that you can again either sell directly into the market, liquefy, convert to ammonia, other things, and deliver to the market. So we're color agnostic, sort of try to take a engineering and a sort of a cost, business, engineering, technological lens to this. In some areas, it's going to make more sense to do green, maybe where you have abundant or prolific low-cost renewables and you've got good sources of water. In other areas, it's going to make more sense to do blue, where you've got high-quality, low-carbon intensity natural gas, and you've got good geology to do sequestration, and you got the right skill sets. I think the U.S. Gulf Coast, you're going to see a lot of blue in the sort of certainly for sure the next decade, couple decades. because of the great abundance we've been blessed with in the Permian and other places.
And hydrogen, really the promise of hydrogen, if I remember my stats correctly, hydrogen's 2.6 times more energy dense than natural gas. And with the ways that you're describing about manufacturing that, there's practically no emissions, right? And so that's the promise.
You've captured the CO2 in the production process. So hydrogen would be, combusted to water, basically water vapor.
I'm a huge car guy, and so I've been following closely what is being said by auto manufacturers, right? Obviously, we're going through this EV boom. However, if you go to Ford dealerships currently, there are significant amounts of Ford Lightnings that are not selling. And I think there's a couple factors that are kind of at play here. I think for one of the manufacturing process, a significant amount of these minerals are in certain places where we have a lot of tension geopolitically. And I think that poses a lot of risk. I think there's also some ethical things with some of the things, not just for EVs, for cell phones, for anything that have batteries, particularly with the cobalt, right? And all the stuff that's kind of coming out there. But you've seen a significant amount of, let's use Hyundai, for example. Hyundai has come out. I think BMW also said the same thing and said that the future of our fleets are going to be internal combustion engines leveraging hydrogen more so than electrical vehicles. Right. I went to OTC. Saudi Aramco had a prototype internal combustion engine running on hydrogen. They are at their booth. And so I'm really, really closely paying attention to that. Hyundai is actually releasing a hydrogen powered vehicle, I think either next year or the year after. That was a prototype concept that I think is going to be completely game changing and showing what's possible. Right. I think a lot of people naturally kind of get scared of hydrogen due to things like the Hindenburg 100 years ago, obviously I think technology's changed a little bit since then, but I'm paying attention to the hydrogen space very, very closely. Have you heard of Gold Hydrogen?
Yes.
With Cemvita, with those guys? Amazing stuff they're working on.
Yeah. So hydrogen, we could spend hours talking about hydrogen as well. And it really intersects. And when you talk about the vehicle fleet, it intersects with so many things. So I'll try to unpack a few of them and feel free to double click and interrupt on any of these. So look, I think broadly you can think about light duty vehicles and then you can think about heavy duty vehicles. I think, the jury is still out. Clearly, electric vehicles have made big inroads in the passenger car market. And then you've got the heavy duty fleet, which will have its own evolution over time. Again, I like to keep options open and see how the market develops. I do think, and this ties to our renewable fuels business, liquid hydrocarbons or gaseous hydrocarbons are going to be a big part of the mix. This goes to your energy addition or energy expansion. So to just imagine it's going to magically all disappear is probably not a good POV, right? So I think hydrogen, generating those demand sinks is going to be critical to help enable the production side of the business to scale here in the U.S. and elsewhere. So it could be light or heavy duty vehicles. Hydrogen to a derivative and used in the European market or in the Asian markets, for instance, hydrogen to ammonia, or it could be hydrogen through a LOHC or hydrogen carrier. It's a hydrogen carrier molecule, and then delivering hydrogen to be evolved back out into a gaseous state in the end market is going to play a role. So lots of innovation, I think, still to happen in hydrogen. I think it's has the potential to play a really big role in many different markets: Asia, Europe, U.S. Over time. So
hydrogen to ammonia, obviously ammonia being used primarily for fertilizer. That's essentially net zero ammonia, and there's a significant amount of emissions that come from things like farming. And so you guys call it synthetic fuels or biofuels? Or
renewable fuels.
Renewable fuels.
Renewable fuels.
Wow, major implications there.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about, so hydrogen, man, super interesting. What are you guys doing anything in nuclear?
Nuclear is earlier days. Nuclear sits more in our technology ventures organization.
Okay.
So, there have been a ton of advancements. I love this space. And, I'm an advocate of an inclusive all the above approach. So they call small modular reactors, which uses, more of the traditional fission technology. But that's I think, going to grow and scale over time. Of course, the real breakthrough would be if somebody can really make fusion happen and really make progress there. And look, we as Chevron, sort of again evaluate this landscape and look for companies that have the potential to make significant breakthroughs as well. A lot of this is longer dated. So that's why, again, the pragmatist in me says traditional hydrocarbons, big role to play in the here and now and for the future. The new energies that we're focused on, CCUS and hydrogen, have a role to play in now and into the midterm future. And then you've got further evolution that's going to happen in the long run. That could be things like nuclear or other things. And look, I just think that's part of the energy story. If you go back to the dawn of time when the caveman first rubbed sticks together and we made fire, maybe lightning struck, and then this is convenient, we can roast some meat. And then you go to to whale oil, to coal, to oil, to natural gas. It's always been an evolution and it's always been an expansion. And I think that's going to continue for many, many years to come.
Evolve or die.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
Any other technologies you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, the renewable fuels is one we didn't touch a lot on, but this is one where I think you can get the double benefit of it's a renewable, sustainable production. This could be, there's a broad bucket. Soybean oil to a product, could be distillers corn oil to a product, could be renewable natural gas. There's a whole broad bucket there. But this is one that's got the double benefit of being environmentally friendly, and it can go be processed or ultimately used in the existing fleet, if you will, right? So things are a little bit different as you think about converting some of these renewable-based feedstocks through refineries into finished products. The chemistry is a little bit different. You have to tweak things within the refineries, but it's stuff we know how to do. And then you end up with a product that's low carbon intensity, but that can be blended into the existing vehicle or transportation fleet. So I think that's going to play a huge role. Of course, we bought REG, Renewable Energy Group, and it's now branded Chevron REG, based in Iowa, and that's going to be a growing part of our portfolio over the years to come. So lots in that space. And again, the theme here, I think, is optionality, finding a way to let the most efficient and effective technologies win in their respective markets, and then recognizing that this is not a substitution process. This is an addition process or an expansion process, to use both of our words, to meet the demand of the world. I mean, one of the things, to go back to sort of why I got into this business, it's so fascinating. It's a mix of, you've got technology, you've got geopolitics in many areas, you've got a critical need for society, for the world, and then you've got the business aspect. You have to be able to ultimately make this a business. The energy industry allows you to blend those 3 or 4 really special ingredients and have a really fulsome and fun career and work in so many different areas. And if you sort of got an open mind, a growth mindset, you can do so many wonderful things in this business. And I'm so thrilled to play just a small part of it.
It's exciting times, Chris. This has been fantastic. I've learned a ton. I think when you're looking at where does a lot of the innovation come, I think there will be a few players who are totally new to the space. You have some brilliant people who can do some stuff, but I think a lot of the innovation is going to come from the incumbents. And I think that we have the people, the process, the history of powering the world, and we have some of the smartest people in the world working on things like this. And so it's super exciting to see what you guys are working on the new energy side. Thanks again for making this happen. Thanks, Kelly, for making this happen. This has been fantastic, man.
Hey, thank you so much. And
absolutely,
maybe we do another one a little bit down the road when we've got some more progress to share.
I want to see how things develop. We'll keep things up to date.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right.
Have a good one.
Guys, if you like the show, take 2 seconds, leave us a rating review, share it with all your friends, and we will catch you on the next episode.